In our last movie, I said we'd hop over and take a look at some of the Flash export options, and we will. But I did want to explain some of the other options you have available to set here that we haven't gone into, and some things that might be missing if you're used to working with some export programs for, say, web. One is here the keyframe rating. You may wonder, well, I know you talked about keyframes for animation. What's that have to do with rendering? When you get to actual file rendering with Animation Studio Pro or any video program, you've got the ability to vary within any given codec how much it compresses using something called keyframes. So in this case, the keyframe isn't a significant drawing area where the computer figures out everything in between. A keyframe is where it makes little marks for itself and then it compresses using the algorithm in the codec either more or less significantly when it's working with the program. The broader apart, or say if we had a value of 150 frames in here, that means we're actually going to get a reasonable level of compression. The more keyframes you add, typically the better compression you'll get, but that's not always true. For every rule, there's an exception, and that's one here. Another item here is limit data rate. Now, this is where you'll want to consult the documentation of the software you're sending this to. If you're going to be deploying it to the web yourself and you happen to be building web pages, there's kind of some rules of thumb for how much data you want to try to push through the phone lines or digital subscriber lines, DSL, when people are working with it. For about a 320, 240 type of format, you usually want to keep, for standard definition, the data rate to something at about 700 kilobits per second or less. If you're working with high definition, that's quality, not necessarily size, you'll want to keep the kilobits per second to about 1,000 or 2,000. So that's either 1 or 2 megabits per second as a rule of thumb. You can certainly put in something like 6,400 or something like that, but what the animation will be doing then after export is actually trying to feed itself to the computer at that rate. And if your viewer doesn't have the bandwidth to bring that in, it's just going to sit there and keep choking on them instead of playing smoothly. So rule of thumb, 700 for kind of standard definition. You can make it less than that if you want it to come in a little bit faster working with a smaller file, and 1 or 2 megabits per second for high definition types of items. Additionally, here you can usually choose colors in terms of how much you want to reduce the file size. Less colors means smaller file sizes. But again, the codec capabilities, the quality, least, you may not be able to see it, but you can try it on your own. Nasty when it's down here on the least side. When you get up to best, it looks a little more reasonable. The H.264 codec is probably one of the most efficient codecs out there. It's gaining popularity in DVD, those type of mediums, because it does so well. There's others out there like DivX. It doesn't have the market penetration of some of the others. So it's always a trade-off between what you have and what the people you're sending it to will have. Well, now that I've talked about that, let's take a look at exporting instead to, we got a little render frame here we can get rid of. Let's go ahead and export instead to a Flash format. So we'll come in here, and instead of QuickTime Movie, and if you select one of these formats like JPEG, BMP, Targa, PNG, PSD, it will automatically export sequenced files. I'll choose PSD for now. If we select OK, we get some options to save them into the folder, and it will, as we look here, it's just creating separate files there. So if we were to open that up, we would just see a ton of files in there. We'll go ahead and look at that when we export to Flash. Let me do that again. I'll use the keyboard shortcut this time to export. And instead of PSD, we'll come down and choose SWF. We get some different options available to us now. In terms of size, we've got some we can't uncheck anymore. But we also have the variable line widths right here for the SWF file. So I'll select OK for that. Choose OK here. We get an option. Here we can see all those PSD files. They just come in, they're numbered sequentially with, I believe that's the Razor numbering system, 2 zeros plus the digits, so you get all the way up to 9,999. When we go ahead and export the untitled SWF, it goes incredibly fast. In fact, it's done already. So I wanted to mention a couple things. When you go to Project Settings, we can come here and set our background color. Right now it's at the standard light gray. We can make it blue, whatever. I'll choose OK. We can see that. When you export this file, I'll do a quick render using the keyboard shortcut we learned earlier. We can see that we've got a file with a background color. However, this file format exports with the information for transparency in the Swift format. So if you're bringing it into a web page, you'll need to set the specific parameters for the SWF file container for W mode transparent, and that blue will simply go away. I'll mention again that if you're using any layer effects like drop shadows, that type of thing, the Flash format export does not pick up those capabilities. So there's a little bit of a trade-off. You get some ease of animation with characters here that you just can't match in Flash, but you don't get all the little bells and whistles that you might be accustomed to if you work with Flash on a regular basis. So that covers rendering out of Animation Studio Pro into different formats and some of the considerations when you're doing that. In our next sections of movies, we're going to be working on some user projects and also exploring some features that you haven't seen yet.